Okay, the aim of this session is to look at the Darwinian model of evolution, to just see how it has some major faults and deficiencies, but mainly to then ask ourselves, why would intelligent Christadelphians try and incorporate such a changeable, unproven, untested theory into our belief system? And that's really the end question we'll come up to. Why would you take the Darwinian model and make something of it? Now, God makes a challenge to everybody when he says this in Isaiah 45 verse 11 and 12, "Thus saith Yahweh, the Holy One of Israel, and his Maker," interesting, Maker of man, "ask of me things to come concerning my sons, and concerning the works of my hands command you me." So God says, I can predict things to come. You've just got to inquire. And why would we inquire of God? Well, because he is the creator. And God's assurance that he has the power to reveal the future is based upon the fact, I made the earth, I created man upon it. It doesn't say I evolved man upon it. I created man upon it. Even I, my hands, have stretched out the heavens, and all their host have I commanded. So God says, on the basis of my creation, you can be sure that I'm in control of the future. So ask me about the future. So God uses the creation and the very fact that he created as the basis of prophecy. So what does the Bible say about the creation of life upon this planet? Well, the Bible says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So this is a work of God. It was a work of creation. Life and order came about 6,000 years ago, as is evidenced by the Bible genealogies and the 7,000-year plan. It took 6 evening mornings to accomplish it, which is what Genesis 1 is all about. Angels performed the creation. The Elohim were active in the process. We read, the Elohim said, let us make man in our image. The Elohim saw that it was good. The Elohim did what God commanded. So they were the agents by which God created the world. And God created life with a definite purpose in mind. Man in our image and our likeness, to have dominion over the beasts of the field, etc. And there was always a purpose in what God did in the creation when he made it. So the Bible is clear about what happened on this earth. 6,000 years ago, in 6 days, God created life with a purpose. So that's what the Bible says. Now let's look what Darwin says. Before we get there, our spiritual paradigm. We come to this whole subject with this mindset. We believe that God is, and that God rewards those who seek him. And we believe that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And that is the most compelling and brilliant opening to any book that's ever been written. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Brother David Levin said this about it in his book, The Creation Text. He said that Genesis 1 verse 1 goes to the absolute limit of anything the human mind can grasp and places God beyond that, all in a handful of words. No other thought could possibly start the Bible. It's the sentence of sentences in the book of books. So it is a dramatic opening to the Bible and very well worth thinking. So we're coming from the context, from the paradigm that we believe in God, and we believe that God created all things, as he says in his Bible. Where does evolution come from? Well, evolution comes from an exclusion of God. Evolutionists, this is from the New Scientist magazine, evolutionists may disagree on many things, and they certainly do. But their commitment to atheism ensures their solid agreement on the non-existence of an intelligent creator. So they are quite upfront. We are scientists, and our commitment to atheism is absolute. So they completely blindside themselves from even investigating or even letting in the door the divine foot. So we've got to understand, when we're dealing with Darwinian evolution, that's what it's about. Go back to the Greeks. Interesting, evolution goes right back to Thales and Aristotle. Way back there. It's interesting, even back there, that Aristotle said, look, the theory of survival of the fittest as an explanation of evolution is a bit poor. And he didn't even think it was a great theory, but in his own writings he said, it sounds a good idea, but it's got a lot of weaknesses. So it's an ancient Greek concept, so that just goes back a long way. Just to summarise, the difference between Darwinian evolution, which is the top line there, the creationist, which is us, and the theistic evolutionist, which is our brethren who've gone down this path, that's a simple diagram of actually seeing the difference. Now, the Darwinian evolutionist says everything is natural, it's spontaneous generation, so it actually just happened by itself without any reason. The complexity of life, well, it's just by evolution, so things got gradually more complex over time. So that's the evolutionist, so it happened by itself and it's got more complex. The creationist, which is us, says it happened supernaturally. It was a miracle that life came in the first place, And it's complex because God made it complex. So miracle plus miracle. Theistic evolutionist says, yes, the origin of life started with God, but the process is the natural selection. It's the natural mutation, the natural development. They do admit that occasionally God kicked it along here and there, but generally the process was left to be a natural process of evolution. So they actually have the compromise between the two. And that's really important to see that compromise, that they actually trying to incorporate some of the natural but still have God in the same part. As they say, the acceptance that biological evolutionary theory as formulated by Darwin has found to be correct is therefore a mechanism that God employed for his own creative purpose. So you can see the compromise that evolution is when you come to make it theistic. So again, just a chart form of the difference. The Bible is all about purpose. The earth was created with a sure purpose. God intends to fill it with his glory. The heavens are marvellously regulated, full of evidence of design and reason in the heavens, and the way that the planets move around each other, absolutely incredible when you look at it. Complexity of created things, and we always state the old Paley principle. If you find a watch on the beach, or you find a mobile phone lying out here in the bush, you pick it up and you think, wow, did that just form from the sand and from the rocks that are around here? And does it actually work? And can I actually speak to somebody in Australia on this thing? And it just happened to come from the grass and the rocks. I mean, that's the Paley principle. Would you believe that watch you found on the beach just formed by the work of the tide to make it actually with all the springs and things it's got in it, and the microchip that it's got in it? Did it just happen like that? Would you believe it if somebody told you it just happened from the sand on the beach? Well, everything in creation is far more complex than those things and far more detailed. So complexity is a great proof of a design and a creative mind. Come to the humans ourselves. We have incredible potential and capacity for learning and for morality. We can be educated in moral things. We can learn things. We can pass it on to the future generations. We can think, we can design, we can invent. Animals work purely on instinct. You train an animal by rewarding it or punishing it. So they work on instinct. Humans can actually think and work on principles of moral principles. And then we can invent and we can pass it on, we can learn, we can write books so that we become incredibly in control of the creation as we're supposed to be. So, God has a tremendous purpose in what he did in the creation. By contrast, Darwinian evolution has no purpose, no direction, no intent and no motive. And we need to understand that. This is from Jay Gould, a famous paleontologist. Evolution is a copiously branching bush with innumerable present outcomes. Not a highway, not a ladder, not going towards a summit. So evolution is just something that happened. It just happened. It didn't have any reason to happen. It didn't have any point in happening. No object, no purpose. Evolutionists cannot use words like it drove in that direction, there was a directional thrust, or anything that suggests purpose, design or an agenda. So the fact that we are here with our brilliant minds, the fact that we're here with our wonderful creation around us, the fact that we see all these beautiful things, that we actually have a planet that is fitted for life, just is a pure chance. And it's not here for any reason. It just happens to be here. Stephen Gould, another paleontologist. Humans are here by the luck of the draw, not the inevitability of life's direction or evolution's mechanism. We are glorious accidents of an unpredictable process with no drive to complexity. That's what they have to believe. Now we're talking about Darwinian evolution, atheism here. We're not talking about theistic because they try and bring the two together. But if you're going to go down the evolutionary path, you are dealing with people who think that we're just glorious accidents of an unpredictable process. And that's exactly how they see themselves. It's just blind chance. So what did Darwin bring to the world that has given men, well, it was the chance to ignore their creator. Evolution, this is what it is. Formulated by Charles Darwin about 1859, begins with the theory of the spontaneous generation of life. So life just happened to come to pass. It just happened. No reason, no purpose, no design, it just happened. It then changed by natural selection and mutation. So the first cells, they divided and became something else, and then they mutated. So there was a fault in the thing, and it actually produced another model of something else, and that grew into something else. And there was an upward evolution to form new species. So you start off with a single cell, and you get the protozoans, and then you get little tribolites, and then you get little fish, and then the fish crawls out of the water and becomes a lizard, and so it goes on. You know the story of evolution. An upward evolution of new species developed from nothing by pure chance. Survival of the fittest, so when you get a variation comes out and there's a stronger one of the same kind that eats it, and that's the end of that, and the best ones survive. So the best genes are kept. That's what Darwin said. So evolution suggests that life forms progress upward and become more complex over time. So we've seen this increasing complexity go through life. It has this unbelievable reliance upon blind chance occurring over and over and over, billions and incalculable trillions of times. And that's just to produce one thing.
Just so what he meant by survival of the fittest, which is very important for us, he didn't mean survival of the strongest. He meant the survival of the animal that was best fit for the environment.
Yes, yeah.
So if I'm an animal that can survive a little water and I turn up here, I might be weaker than a stronger animal.
But you suit the climate, yeah.
I'm more fit to this environment, so I will survive.
Yeah.
That's what he meant by it.
Yeah, it wasn't just the strongest animal. You're quite right. It was the one most appropriate for the situation it was in.
There's a fault in that thinking too, which helps to understand why there's errors in his thinking.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Just to outline Darwin evolution, this is the basic theory of the whole thing. The Big Bang, the formation of hydrogen. The laws of the universe just happened to come into exact precision at that one point at the time of the Big Bang. Higher elements evolve, formation of planets and stars, origin on life of Earth by pure accident, and changes within a species, which is microevolution. So species then modify, and then you get macroevolution. And we can make a distinction between macro and microevolution, where you get mutations and natural selection taking place. And that's just a little summary of how evolution, the Darwinian evolution, explains itself. So a Big Bang, you know, something that you can't hardly even see, is much smaller than a pinhead, went bang in a trillionth of a second and formed all the universes you see around you, and all the laws operating just came into existence at exactly that point of time. And that's very, very believable, isn't it? But all of this just happened by pure chance and without any purpose. So this is what Darwinian evolution, this is what atheism actually does believe. Darwin, he was amazed. He was amazed the way his work took off. I was a young man with unformed ideas. I threw out queries, suggestions, wondering all the time over everything. And to my astonishment, the ideas took like wildfire. People made a religion of them. And they replaced religion with Darwin. And that was the thing. They made a religion of not believing in God. His book, The Origin of the Species, when you go through it, it has 800 untested speculations. He says it might be this, it might be that, we think it could be this, we assume this, we may be that, perhaps this. And right through the book you've got these speculations. That didn't deter people because they wanted to hear it. That's why men want evolution. Julian Huxley, one of the great atheists. Darwinism moved the whole idea of God as the creator of organisms from the sphere of rational discussion. So we're going to be logical, God's got to be left out of the picture. Darwin pointed out that no supernatural designer was needed. Since natural selection could account for any new form of life, there is no room for a supernatural agency in its evolution. So he was thankful that Darwin got rid of God. Darwin is called the man who gave the world the excuse to be what they wanted to be. So all of a sudden you can get away from any restrictions God puts upon you. This is Dr. Nielsen. Beyond its impact on traditional science, Darwinism was devastating to conventional theology, which is why the churches all decided to bring in theistic evolution. They had to some way to cope with the barrage of now scientific conviction that came from Darwin. And that's why even you find in between the 1870s and the 1880s, the Christadelphian magazine had to combat the thoughts about Darwin that were coming up inside the Brotherhood. So it just gives you some idea that that's how the scientists see that they were able to get rid of God. And so they made a monkey of us, and you know, that's the process that Darwin basically outlined, that from a fish that walked out of the sea, it became sort of half a lizard, and then became a monkey, and then finally became us. And you just wonder if God needed to use such a process as that. So let's just talk about now why evolution is impossible. You know, there are things that we can talk about, and I'm not going to deal with all the scientific arguments, but just some of the things that help us to understand that the Darwinian model just cannot work. Incredible complexity. And we've got there just a little demonstration of the strand of DNA, and we'll talk about DNA more later on, but that's the greatest example of incredible complexity. Beauty and colour. You know, the principle of evolution is that, you know, the most appropriate or fitted thing would survive. Why would you have beauty and colour? I mean, colour attracts attention to yourself. You're going to get the one that's going to get eaten. Why is there such colour in creation? Why are things so beautiful to look at? Amazing design. So you get, we'll see tonight the video on the bacterial flagellum, which is give you some idea of the design. Complementary created things. You know, the fact that you've got in Australia on the Barrier Reef we have the clownfish, and the clownfish is a little orange and white fish, and the way that the clownfish gets his food is he swims around in the tentacles of an anemone, which is like a plant. Now the anemone has got poisonous fronds that float around in the wind, and the clownfish swims around, and he has got a protective coating. So he can swim around inside that anemone, and he flirts himself and waves his tail, and the big fish comes down and says, I'm going to have a bit of that, hits the anemone and is immediately electrocuted or stung, and the anemone then grabs it, takes it inside and starts to chew it up, and then spits out for the clownfish his share. The clownfish, he gets really excited. When he sees the fish go inside the anemone, he gets really excited, he gets all agitated, and all of a sudden the anemone spits out bits for him to eat. So you get this cooperation between a fish and a plant that goes on, and the clownfish would starve if the anemone didn't feed him. But the anemone couldn't catch a fish unless the clownfish attracted it. So you think, how does that work in evolution? And there's millions of examples like that. You look at the honey badger in Africa and the honey bird that finds the bee's nest and the badger breaks it open for him. And you know, this complementary created things is a remarkable thing. Reproduction. You know, reproduction. The Bible says, how do the bones of a child grow in the womb? And God says reproduction is the most amazing thing that happens, and yet in all life forms it's actually there, and it happens. So evolution can't explain where matter began. It cannot explain how life came to exist. The dating methods are highly suspect because they're based on uniformity as a theory. Species have been observed to vary by selective breeding, but never do we see a change of species. We've never been observed, so it's not scientific to say that species can change to another species. When you crossbreed animals within the same species, such as mules breeding with horses, or donkeys breeding with horses, you get mules. Lions and tigers, you get ligers, and zedonks, which are zebras and donkeys, you get these zedonks, which are invariably sterile. Because God said, after their own kind. So, you know, that you can't crossbreed from species. You can't cross a monkey with a cheetah and get something in between. You've got to stay inside the species. You just worked out what a zedonk is, did you? It's the offspring of a donkey and a zebra. So because they're the same gender or the same type of animal, they can actually breed, but the offspring is invariably sterile. So they can't pass on the ability to breed to that creature. It's about the shape of a donkey with stripes. Have you ever seen a zedonk? Well, you're only uneducated lot. I'm sure you've seen a liger though, haven't you? Oh well, it looks like a lion with stripes on it. Yeah. Okay, well they have bred these animals, but you see plenty of mules and burros, and you breed the burro and the horse, you get a mule, but the mule is sterile. Okay, so again, you know, your education is sadly lacking. Okay, there's no intermediary fossils. You know, you can't dig up half monkeys or half tigers. There's no intermediary fossils ever been found. And how would it be if the bats had been trying to develop their sonar? You know, they depend upon their sonar to feed. They find moths by sonar. So they fly out at night and they zap out radio signals and they think, oh, there's a moth over there. And as the moth goes like this and that, they home in on it because of their radar going back and forwards like that. So that the first radar was in bats. And they were incredibly good at changing the flight at the last instant because that moth is flying all over the place. And they can just hit it with unerring accuracy in complete darkness. So if you're an evolving bat, you're going to starve because you've got to work out, it took men years to refine radar to be able to track a plane. But the bat had to have it within the first couple of days or he's going to starve. You can't have years of experimentation with something like that. So it's got to be created working. And you can imagine the bats trying to get into their cave when they've only got sonar to guide them. You're going to hit every wall on the way and bang, bang, bang. But they had to have the radar perfect. Mathematical impossibility of charts, you start working the odds on the chances of even one cell producing and they're quite ridiculous. All the frauds, I'll talk about the frauds in a moment, but evolution and Darwinian evolution is littered with frauds and speculation, which are taught as fact, and it's still in the textbooks. All the debunked things are still in the textbooks because it suits their cause. Mutations do not continue onto the future generations, they never improve a species. So mutations, we'll talk about them now. What's wrong with that cat? Got 4 ears. Evolutionist Pierre Paul Grasset. No matter how numerous mutations are, mutations do not produce any kind of evolution. So you can have mutations, you can have pink dolphins, you can have cats with different coloured eyes, two-headed turtles, people with extra toes, some of those in the Bible. They were mutations. Mutations always lead to a loss of genetic information, so they are copying a mistake. So in the genes there's been a mistake in the copying from parent to child, and it forms a mutation. Subsequent generations rarely produce the mutation because when people marry, the partner that doesn't have the mutation overrides the one with the mutation. And that's how God designed it, so that generally mutations won't carry on, which is why in the end God said you can't marry relatives because you might both have the defective gene. And that then passes on and it almost ensures certainly the child's going to have a deficiency. So your mutations are a loss of genetic information. So it's not increasing the gene pool. It's not making you a different creature. It's actually saying that something in your genes has been taken away by the mutation. If a long-term evolution has occurred, mutations would have multiplied to an impossible level. If it was the fact that mutations could pass on, we would all be mutants of some sort. We would be the whole creation would be completely mutants of some sort because it always makes it worse and worse and worse and passes on all those mutations. They actually know that over 100 human diseases are linked to mutations, and the fact that diseases are passed on between generations is because the mutations are multiplying and they are always negative in their outcome. A few more examples of mutations: double-headed snakes, cats half and half. Really quite odd things happen when mutations. It doesn't always improve things, does it? When it comes to point mutations within DNA, you can actually get this breakdown that occurs between where there should have been a connection. There's actually been something left out in the mutation, and it's a point mutation, they call it. It's what this scientist says. All point mutations that have been studied on the molecular level turn out to reduce the genetic information and not increase it. So they are looking for evidence to support Darwin, and every time they look, and the further deeper they go, they find it says the opposite. So the mutations do not help. Darwin based it on mutations. They are saying that mutations are getting them nowhere. Most mutations are bad. In fact, good ones are so rare that we can consider them all bad. And that's back in 1946. And people are saying, look, Darwin really had the whole basis of mutations was completely wrong. The chance of a positive mutation occurring? Well, this is what is said by this Richard Milton. It's a number so small that in order to account for synthetic evolution by random mutation, one has to have an almost religious faith in the power of extremely unlikely events and very long timescales. And I just noticed that word, the religious faith. In fact, Stephen Hawking said about creation that you almost have to get religious to understand it. So, you know, it's just quite amazing. That was Stephen Hawking?
You said creation, did you mean evolution?
To believe in evolution, sorry, yeah, to believe in evolution, yeah. It almost takes religious faith, and you can see he's saying that if you're going to use mutations as part of your process, then you've got to have a religious faith. You've got to have what a believer has to have, and that is an incredible leap of faith. Now, microevolution is possible. You can take a pair of dogs, and from their litters you can then take out the smallest ones and crossbreed them with other small dogs. And in the end you'll end up with a variation that goes as extreme as that. From the Great Dane to the tiny Chihuahua, they're both dogs. And theoretically they could interbreed. But you see, selective breeding, that's the use of microevolution. And microevolution happens, and it is affected by the environment. That's why Darwin's finches, remember Darwin's thing about the finches on the Galapagos Islands? On the different islands where there were different foods, the finches had this microevolution to actually have different shaped beaks. Now Darwin said this is a fantastic example of upward growth of species. All it was a case of microevolution. That the birds that had bred with the bigger beaks were on certain islands because that suited the food chain there. And it wasn't an example of evolution, it was an example of microevolution. And that's quite a difference we need to understand. You can breed horses. We now have horses in Australia that are this high because people have bred them down through the different types of horses, and they've got these miniature horses now. But they're still horses. So, you can use evolution in a micro sense. Bit of a cartoon, I don't know if you can read that. Common descent, straining at gnats and swallowing camels. So you look at the glorious creation. Eureka, I've just found a mistake in this intelligent code which proves that no one made any of this. And that's what, we saw last night when the TE brings out what they think is mistakes in creation. They ignore everything else, but they say there's a mistake there. Wow, to think that something so small could wipe out something so big. And when you have them putting up the fact that there are mistakes in creation and therefore it evolved and it wasn't created in the sense that God said, it just is amazing. Darwin said this in his book: given that evolution depends on survival of the fittest and natural selection, I must admit that the sight of the peacock's feathers makes me feel ill. Because if you're strutting around with those kind of feathers on your backside, are you the most likely to survive? You think about it. You're a pretty ungainly sort of bird. Even when they have their feathers down, they're a very ungainly bird. So you're not in great survival chances. But again, why would you need such decoration? And it's more about the peacock feather than you can actually imagine. Because Darwin had found out, as the scientists have now even found out more about the peacock's feathers, that it's mostly incredible. You see, normally when something is colourful, it's because it has a pigment in it. So the light reflects off it in a certain way. The peacock's feathers are not like that. They're actually like the most complicated set of mirrors you could ever imagine, or spectrums. So the feathers are incredibly diverse in the way they put together to create the colours. So it's not a matter of pigment in the feathers, it's a matter of the way they reflect light. And the scientists have actually discovered that it's actually light refraction and not pigment that actually creates the beautiful colour of the peacock's feathers. Now, that's why Darwin felt ill. Because is that going to come by chance? Is that going to come by natural selection and mutations? It's something which is evidence of creation, isn't it? So I can understand why he felt a bit sick. Irreducible complexity, that's a term you need to remember because it's a good way of knocking evolution. Darwin proposed gradual upward progression. Second law of thermodynamics, which was by Einstein, shows the opposite happens, that things break down. You know that from your own life. You buy a house, it doesn't maintain itself. Inevitably the drains block, the gutters get full of leaves, and it has to be painted and then bits fall off. You get a car, does it get newer every year? It doesn't, does it? It's a claptrap in a few years because things break down. That's an inevitable law of nature. Look at our human bodies. Do we get better as we get older? No, we don't. We get more decrepit. So the law of thermodynamics is that things are reducing. And, the opposite happens. What evolution says, things are getting better, increasing and improving. Most things in creation are incredibly complex and can't exist in a less complex environment. For example, the bacterial flagellum. We'll do that in the video, so I'll leave that go because that's an incredible example of an outboard motor that you can't do without any one of the parts. And we'll look at that tonight in the DVD. Problems of evolution. Well, if you're a Darwinian, you have to believe that the complex structures such as eyes and ears came into being by a slow evolutionary process, and that needs fantastic faith because until the eye has perfectly got all the parts, then why would evolution have it? Why would evolution let it exist in a half of a form if it wasn't functioning? Evolution would say, this is a vestigial organ, I don't need it, and would gradually get rid of it. Why would you have an eye that's 3/4 developed? It doesn't do you any good. So you've got to say that because chance is all that's operating here, is that it just happened like that. It just happened to go on developing in a certain direction till it became a perfect working, functioning eye, which is just incredible faith to have to believe that. Highly developed eyes, so compound eyes with calcite lenses, were found in the Cambrian tribolites. Now the tribolites are the little things that started grovelling around in the mud, and right at the bottom of the evolutionary scale, and they've got beautiful eyes. And the evolutionist says, well, they shouldn't have eyes. They weren't allowed to have that until they get out in the land. But they've got eyes. And you know, they really have a problem with these guys. And there's nothing before or after them that looks anything like them. So, you know, the evolutionist scale has got enormous gaps in it. So that's a problem for evolution. Questions to ask. If evolution were true, we should see new species evolving today. But we don't, because species can only produce with like species. The question, you know, when the first fish came out of the water and decided to become a lizard, there had to be other fish that they could interbreed with that were in a similar state, in a similar point, that were actually compatible to breed with. And they actually could produce, and every generation had to find someone to mate with. Whoops. Do evolutionists believe that at every step where there was a mutation or a new species or a variation of a species, that there were both male and female that could interbreed? That doesn't fit with the laws of nature. How did the plants reproduce before the bees had evolved to fertilise the flowers? Things like that are just questions that evolution's got no answer for. The frauds of evolution. Well, you know, you've seen the progression, the ape going to man. The family tree of Darwin, which is on, when you get the set of notes, it's on the front of those notes, the family tree of going up from the first cells, the tribolites, up to the man at the top of the tree. Still used, and yet it's been debunked and the tree's been cut down many times. The Piltdown Man, we'll talk about in a moment. You know, it was 43 years in textbooks that the Piltdown Man was the great proof of evolution. It turned out to be fake bones. The Ramithicus fossil, a few teeth, later proved to be an orangutan. Java Man, they dug up a whole lot of bones in one area. They were actually a lot of animals mixed together. Nebraska Man, one pig's tooth. Lucy, you know, the big claim of our time, you know, the one that actually rewrote the whole genetic structure of man, now proved to be a chimpanzee. Peking Man, you know, it was a great find back in the 50s, but when they actually examined the bones, they were found to be a modern man, and then the bones were lost somehow. Neanderthal Man found to be a deformed recent skull bone, and Cro-Magnon Man, another modern man believed to be old, but was only because it was near some old relics. And these are the missing links they put up as proof of the evolutionary tree.
It seems like most of these that come up, you know, they find one of that kind of scenario and they say, here's the proof.
Yeah.
But there ought to be millions.
There should be millions of them. There should be lots of them. Yep, lots and lots of them. So we see this so often, and you've probably seen this in textbooks, and you've got them all there, you know. And, you know, there's Nebraska Man, there's Piltdown Man, there's Peking Man, there's Neanderthal Man, there's Cro-Magnon Man, you know, Heidelberg Man, and you've got all these different guys, and you think, well, that looks pretty impressive, and they've got all these people, and, you know, that you think, well, if they can draw them so accurately, they must have a pretty good idea of what they look like. Well, here they are. Nebraska Man, as drawn, pretty interesting looking individual, turns out to be one pig's tooth. Okay? So there's a good use of, that's all they found was one pig's tooth. But they drew him from a pig's tooth, yep. Okay, so forget Nebraska Man. Piltdown Man. Now, this was a painting that was done at the time, and all the greatest scientists in England came together to announce to the world the great discovery of the Piltdown Man, found in the quarry of Piltdown, said to be 500 to 1 million years old. And for 43 years, this was the foundation of the teaching of evolution in schools. And it was in textbooks for 43 years. The Piltdown Man. Well, what was the Piltdown Man? It was this skull. It was parts of 2 human skulls. When they actually found out what it actually was, it was parts of 2 human skulls from South American Indians who were only 600 years old. So someone had gone to South America and got some old skulls out of a cave. They got the jaw of an orangutan, an elephant molar tooth and filed it down, a hippopotamus tooth, a chimpanzee's tooth, put the whole lot in iron sulfate to make it brown, an acid, painted it brown, patched it with bubble gum to hold it together, and it was in textbooks for 43 years. Eventually they exposed it in 1954, somewhere around there. 56, I think it was, 50 something anyway. This is from the paper. The Piltdown forger was finally named, and he actually admitted to what he'd done, that he'd actually made this thing up. But they had put that in the textbooks for years, and it's still in textbooks today. And everyone now agrees it was an incredible fraud. You might have seen this one in textbooks, Haeckel's drawing of embryos, when he points out that, you know, the embryo of the humans, of the fish and the pig and the thing are all got similarities, and the human embryo's got gills. Complete and utter fraud. Fake. He made the drawings up. They weren't drawings of anything actually happened. He made it up. And that's still in books today. Disowned by all scientists who are honest, but they still keep printing it. The amino acid theory. 1953, Stanley Miller claimed to have created amino acids as a basis, which is the basis for life cells, by using methane, ammonia, hydrogen, water and electricity. Science now disputes that hydrogen was actually present back then, rather that carbon dioxide and nitrogen were. So actually, what he told them he used to make the amino acid was different to what actually he did use. People have tried to replicate Miller's experiment ever since, and no one's ever been able to do it. So what he claimed happened, they believe he actually was a fraud, but you'll still find amino acids as the basis of all your textbooks on evolution, based upon Miller's experiment. So it just shows you what a fraudulent lot this really is. It's never been replicated. You all know about the peppered moths. You know, the theory of natural selection is that in England they have these peppered moths, and some are white and some are brown or darkish in colour. And because of the coal dust, the trees were very dark in that area, and when the moths came out, the birds would eat the white ones. So eventually all the moths in that area became brown or black, because the white ones could be seen by the birds and they would go off first. So there's your survival of the fittest principle coming through. So you've got all the birds here eating the white moths. So natural selection goes on all the time. And in that area, and you know, there were two reasons why the white moths disappeared. One, because they got covered in coal dust, and secondly, moths don't come out in the daytime when the birds can see them. They're not eaten by birds because they come out at night. The birds are all asleep. So the peppered moth fraud, you can't see the dark moth there, but that's how they said the dark moth and the white moth, you can't see the dark one, so it doesn't get eaten. But they don't come out in the daylight to be seen by birds. They're eaten by bats and owls and things like that. So, you know, it's a complete fabrication to say that this is an example of evolution. The ones you've got here were actually dead moths that were pinned and glued to the tree so they could be photographed. And it just shows you the whole thing is a complete and utter fraud. Flight. Well, this is what the biologists say about flight. The early stages of flight began with a feathered, endothermic, carnivorous dinosaur. So here's an endothermic. This is not a cold-blooded dinosaur. This is a warm-blooded dinosaur running after its prey. So you've got this dinosaur running along and he's flapping his long feathered arms. Now, feathered arms? You ever seen a dinosaur with feathered arms? So, you know... Okay, you've never seen a dinosaur, good on you. So, you know, you've got this lizard, basically, that's running after its prey, and it's flapping its arms as it's going, and the long wing feathers are originated to make a cage to trap its prey. And thus flight is the culmination of a long predatory leap. Well, this is a real leap of faith. So, look how the dedicated evolution imagines birds developed. Lizards jumped off trees, but birds have feathers, which are incredibly complex. Look at a bird's feather under a microscope. It's amazingly complex. They're hollow. They have very light bones. You get a bird's bones and open them up, they're all hollow. They got little cross structures across them to give them strength. But they're different to your bones, because your bones are heavy. Birds have incredibly light bones that enable flight to occur. But also, the biggest part of a bird is the breast. Why? Because it keeps the wings going. Because that's where they need all the muscles. Lizards don't have that. They've got little tiny claws and they've got no breast muscles to speak of. So how does a lizard change its bone and muscle structure to turn scales into feathers? Well, they point out, this guy, I can never say it, Archaeopteryx or something, but they found this fossil. Now, there's another one was found in about 2003, which National Geographic trumpeted as one found in China was another example of this lizard bird, which has now proved to be a total fake, but never retracted by National Geographic, by the way. But they had a whole issue on this fossil they found in 2003. But this is one they did found, this fossil which looked like a bird that had teeth, and therefore they said, aha, here is your, and from that skeleton they drew this bird which has got a scaly head but got wings, and which is seen here devouring a lizard. So that's how they say that flight came, that lizards became birds. Well, it's claimed as the missing link between reptiles and birds. Everything about this is absolutely bird-like. It is warm-blooded, it has feathers, it has light bones, it has gripping feet, but it doesn't have, and it does have teeth. Now that's where it's different to most other birds. It has teeth. Having teeth is the way this bird was created by God. It doesn't mean it had to be a lizard because it has teeth. It just means this is an extinct bird which no longer exists. And like so many other species like the dodo and the moa and the Australian Tasmanian tiger, there are lots of animals that are now extinct because man's wiped them out. And this is just an extinct bird. So, it doesn't mean that a lizard became a bird. It just means we have a fossil of a bird which we no longer see in the world. And God's made some creatures that actually astound them. You know what that is? A duck-billed platypus. And, you get evolutionists talking about the platypus and they just have got no idea where this came from. Because it swims like a fish, it lays eggs in a burrow, it has the duck bill it has a bill like a duck. It actually finds its food. When it's seeking for its food, its eyes are closed. It finds its food by smelling with this bill. This bill is actually a great big snout to smell with. So you put a worm in a pool and the platypus will go around and he'll smell that worm out and go straight to it with his eyes closed. He's got on his back legs, the males have a poisonous claw, which no other creature that they know of has got it, and it lays eggs. It's a mixture of about 10 different species, according to evolutionists. It's a marsupial, yeah. Yeah, it carries its young in its pouch for a while. So it's the most amazing creature, and God's done some pretty interesting things. And there's one that the evolution just cannot explain, how that has from so many different branches of the tree, it's got features that are in the platypus. Another fraud, the evolution of the horse. You see this picture here of the horses, and you're going from this little horse here, they're looking up to its granddaddy up here and saying, this is how the horse evolved to the modern horse. And they say that, look, going back, this is a million years ago, this one was 50 million years, that one's 25, this one's... And so the horse went down through this, over the millions of years we get to the recent horse. And they say, yeah, we've got fossils of all these horses. Problems. There are no intermediary horse fossils. You've just got a whole lot of fossils that look a bit the same. The problem with this tree is that the first fossil has 18 pairs of ribs, the next got 15 pairs, the next 19 pairs, and the modern horse has got 18 pairs. So someone can't count as they go between the various generations of the horse. Beside that, the supposed members of this horse series are actually from fossils outside the presumed dating sequence. So when they say to you that this one's that, they're actually lying to you, because they would place these fossils in different sequence to that. But to make it look good for the picture of the child reading this book, they put it like it's actually a natural progression. It's not. And they don't tell you about the different amounts of ribs each one's got. And it just shows you this is a complete fabrication when you see that in textbooks. The debunked pictures of fossils are still published in textbooks as fact. Millions believe these just because they are published by educators. The dating of fossils and rocks is very impressive, is a very imprecise science based on huge assumptions. But, they dig up a bone and they say this is 142.5 million years old. And they give you an exact date and it sounds very impressive, but they've got no idea really how old it is. Modern views on Darwin. The fossils that decorate our family tree are so scarce that there are still more scientists than specimens. The remarkable fact is that all the supposed physical evidence we have for human evolution can be placed with room to spare inside a single coffin. Collect up all the bones they've got and it would not even fill one coffin. So you can see how little evidence they really have. The mathematical impossibility for even one evolutionary event, let alone billions of random chances. Just to make one cell from having hydrogen and gases present, having the right chemicals in the mineral soup on the earth, having a bolt of lighting hitting at the right temperature, to form one cell. The odds of doing that by chance is 10 to the power of 32,088. That's 1 with 32,088 zeros after it. They're pretty small odds. You would not buy a lottery ticket with those odds. No explanation, and that's just to produce one cell. How that cell would replicate itself is another issue. No explanation of how totally independent species can evolve, both insects and plants. Huge areas of non-conforming strata exist, so they take you to places where they've got strata that looks good, go to other places and it's all upside down and back to front. And it's non-conforming to their theories. I like this one. The probability of life originating by accident is comparable to the chance of producing an unabridged Oxford dictionary as a result of an explosion in a printing factory. It's a pretty honest statement, isn't it? Another one says it's just like having an explosion in a junkyard and getting a jumbo jet coming out of it. The weak points of evolution, reliance upon pure chance. And these are statements by evolutionists themselves. One has only to contemplate the magnitude of the task to conclude that spontaneous generation of a living organism is impossible. The hypothesis that life is developed from inorganic matter is at present an article of faith. I love them when they say it's religious and it's faith you have to believe in Darwin. All our experience is to the opposite. It defies the second law of thermodynamics that all things degenerate. Carbon-14 dating depends upon absolutely static conditions prevailing. Most other dating is circular. They date rocks by fossils and fossils by rocks. And the Big Bang theory has now been debunked. So there's lots of weak points for evolution. It really doesn't stand up to any test. We're asked to believe that at one point the whole universe was less than the size of one pinhead. No explanation of whatever it was that went bang, where that came from. Terms introduced are space-time inflation, so the Big Bang expanded in 1/trillionth of a second, so a whole new dimension of time is created. They talk about the dark ages, the dark matter, the dark energy, and dark just means we haven't got any idea what we're talking about. Accident or intelligent design, the Big Bang, if it happened within 1/trillionth of a second, had to have a place in perfect balance. The first four fundamentals. It had to have gravity, electromagnetism, strong nuclear force, and a weak nuclear force. Any one of those varying by the smallest fraction and the whole universe would fall apart. And that had to happen in 1/trillionth of a second, that they were actually all together at the same time as the Big Bang happened. So you can see the incredible, ridiculous odds that evolution requires to make it happen. So why do men choose to believe it? Well, we all know that you can't prove God absolutely by scientific methodology. Mountains of circumstantial evidence to prove God, but you can't prove God exists. If you could, there would be no need for faith. People don't want God because if there's a creator, there's a reason, and the reason is they should obey him, and they don't want to do that. They don't want to be restrained by God, so they look elsewhere. Any reason not to have God in their lives. What about the old rocks? People say to us, but all the rocks look old. Well, they may be old. They may be very old. Well, some people try to suggest that the facts of nature speak for themselves. A rock does not tell you how old it is. The age of the rock is an interpretation. You must make several assumptions in order to arrive at the supposed 4.5 billion years age of the Earth, including the assumptions of uniformitarianism, which is that things have always remained the same. Darwin actually had lots of doubts. He said this: the number of intermediate varieties which have formerly existed on the Earth must be truly enormous. Why then is not every geologic formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? He said, look, I just can't understand why we can't find them. If my theory is true, there should be millions of intermediate links out there, but they don't exist. Charles Darwin again. Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and this perhaps is the most obvious and gravest objection which could be argued against my theory. Can you believe that the great scientists of the world still parade Darwin as being the answer to everything when Darwin said, I really got no idea what I'm talking about? I'm just hoping this might work out someday. What about the dinosaurs? Well, you always think of dinosaurs as T-Rex and guys like that, and the Brontosaurus, which has now been completely debunked and didn't exist. But, you know, dinosaurs, the actual average size of all the dinosaurs is about the same as a sheep. Now, how do we explain the dinosaurs? Because there's no doubt they dig them up. They're in there in the fossil record. Well, there's a number of ways you can explain dinosaurs. They might have been on the Earth in a previous creation, and if the Earth then became covered in water, they could have been very quickly buried in sediment, and so we find dinosaur fossils today. They might have been animals that existed before the flood and died out before the flood. They might have been even in the ark. God could have brought dinosaurs to Noah who were juveniles or even eggs to the ark, and they might have been in the ark and survived for a short time there afterwards. People like Nimrod soon would have wiped them out. The average known size of dinosaurs is about the size of a sheep. Dinosaurs may explain the behemoth in the Bible. You know, Job talked about behemoth, and God talked about behemoth in the book of Job. And we can't find any creature to match the behemoth because it's got a great tail like a beam or like a cedar that it can wave around, and it doesn't fit the elephant or the hippo very well. The crocodile matches up with Leviathan, but behemoth, we can't find a beast to match it. But the ancient world knew of a beast that God was talking about. And maybe it was a remnant of the dinosaurs. Just something to think about. Amazing how many countries have legends of dragons.
When you say the average size of all known land dinosaurs is about the size of a sheep, is that accepted or is that?
Yeah, that's right, because most dinosaurs are only little things like this.
So what they found, for example, I can't remember the name of the dinosaur that was in the Chicago Museum for many years. It had a name, it was a big floor.
It could be Triceratops or Brontosaurus, one of those. The big ones make all the movies, and that's your problem. The big ones are in the comics and the movies. There's far more little ones than there are big ones.
But there were big ones.
Yeah, there were big ones, yeah.
The fossils they found in the bone show.
Yeah, they found some huge ones, yeah. Yeah. So, you know, there could have been that God, if they were in the ark, that God sent them juveniles. So that, you know, you would have to fit the Brontosaurus or one of those ones in. But I'm just saying these are the possibilities. We don't have to decide on dinosaurs. You know, we can explain dinosaurs by any one of a number of explanations. The fact that they are buried in sediment and become fossils indicates they were quickly buried in water. Because many of the things that are found, like the woolly mammoths, have still got their grass in the mouth, and some of them have even got, you know, fish in their mouths or things that they were eating when they were buried. So, you know, they appear to, a lot of them, have been buried very suddenly. A lot of the dinosaur beds they find are all lumped together in one place, as if they were all swept away with the same flood of some kind. So, you know, you don't have to decide on the dinosaurs, but there are plenty of reasons you can explain dinosaurs in various ways. Let's come to the big question, the question of the origin of life. That is the real big question for the evolutionists. This is Kenneth Miller from Brown University. The most profound unsolved problem in biology is the origin of life itself. We know a great deal about the creative chemistry of the early Earth, but not enough to solve this problem. So how did life get here? The biggest gap in evolutionary theory remains the origin of life itself. The gap between a collection of molecules and even the most primitive cell remains enormous. So they're really questioning this amino acid theory, that you can actually just take elements and make it into a cell. It's an incredible gap that they say is really far, far too much to believe in. The odds of a planet capable of supporting life with the sun nearby are enormous. The number of planets is calculated to be about that number. I won't try and give you a number, but that's about the number of planets they think now that are out there. Science now agrees that some 200 factors would have to be perfectly synchronised to allow life to exist on any planet. Only one known planet has that criteria, which is the planet Earth. Even atheists admit design. Now, Christopher Hitchens, now dead, was one of the leading atheists that joined Richard Dawkins to attack the world against religion. He said this: without question, the fine-tuning of the universe argument is the most powerful argument for the opponents of evolution. So he said, look, I have to admit that is the strongest argument you have in arguing for creation. The way the universe is balanced and structured and the counter forces that exist is the best argument you have, because it's just impossible that come by chance. Professor Paul Davies, an Australian that you borrowed for over here, the appearance of design in the universe is overwhelming. and people say this, these are scientists. This guy, Sir Anthony Flew, a noted biologist, a man regarded at the top of his field, he changed his view on evolution when he got involved with DNA. He said, look, it's just is incredible. It now seems to me, he said, that the findings of the more than 50 years of DNA research have provided materials for a new and enormously powerful argument for design. Investigation of DNA has shown by the unbelievable complexity of the arrangements which are needed to produce life that intelligence must have been involved. I have to go where the evidence leads. And he is the greatest or the most senior convert to believe in intelligent design from the scientific community. He renounced his atheism and said, I just can no longer accept, because the evidence says you have to have a designer when you look at DNA. So how did life come? Well, science says it spontaneously generated in some mineral soup. Richard Dawkins, when pressed by John Lennox in the debate on the BBC television about DNA, is that can you go on saying that DNA just happened by chance? Richard Dawkins, the noted atheist, the noted anti-religion guy, he said, perhaps space travel is part of the seeds of life and DNA on the earth. And there's your greatest renowned atheist saying that you just cannot, I cannot go on believing that it just happened by chance. And he said, well, I can believe in spacemen, but I won't accept angels. So, that just shows you what we're up against. We're dealing here with a theory that is so impossible. And DNA destroys Dawkins. This is Professor McIntosh in the University of Leeds. The logical coded machinery of DNA and the information system it carries shout designed to an unprejudiced mind. Dawkins' defence is based not on scientific facts, but on ideology. Evolutionary thinking is teetering as a way of looking at the evidence, not because of some isolated problems here and there, but because the whole structure is scientifically wrong. And the more they go into DNA, the more they say evolution is completely hopeless. A lot of work needs to be done before scientists will be able to figure out how life came to existence. It will take decades. It's still a theory. The once vaunted family tree has all but been cut down and is fast disappearing. To create by chance, if you took a Scrabble set, put the words into a bag, the letters into a bag, and tried to pull out the word design, like D and then an E and then an S, it would take you, on average, 309 million attempts to get the word design to come out on its own. You'd be there for a long time. The human cell is millions of times more complex than one word, and yet people say that it came by chance. It's still a theory. It believes men must have faith. They hope that the evidence will soon be found. Evolution has to invent other universes we know nothing about to generate and support this one. So the spacemen had to come from somewhere. Well, where did they come from? Who created them? Did they just evolve? And if those so, who generated the DNA for them? And you just go on this endless cycle of questions. The only point of agreement amongst them is that evolution happened. The big issue, Darwin tells us how life came to be by chance. It can never tell us why we're here. So if you believe in Darwin, you've got no hope. There's nothing, there's no future. It just happened to be an accident of nature. The Bible tells you why and how you're here, and it's part of God's eternity. We'll go past that one. Sadly, those who still deny God exists, professing themselves to be wise, says the Bible, they became fools. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And scientists maintain that foolish approach to looking at the things of creation. Darwin, in his book, he said this, with me the horrid doubt always arises whether the conviction of a man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value, are at all trustworthy. So what he was saying there was, if we have evolved from monkeys, can we really trust ourselves to know what we're talking about? Because we're really just intelligent monkeys. He worried about the fact that created creatures are very fallible. So would you believe somebody who's been evolved from an ape, or would you believe somebody that's in the image and likeness of God? Now we'll go past that one. So why do intelligent believers adjust their Bible understanding to include evolution? Well, as we've said, they have an admiration for the vast knowledge of scientists. If you can't defeat a scientific argument, you have to accept it as a truth. And they want to look learned. They want to look, acceptable in the eyes of the educated community. And
Even the educated community, they reject this concept.
well, some of them do. But the mainstream of science sticks with evolution.
Right, but not theistic
No, they hate theistic. They do not accept it. It's exactly what happened. They don't want it. And this is the odd thing. They end up out of sorts with both sides of the argument.
Right.
Yeah.
So if they're concerned about losing the educated scientific youth, I mean, they're lost either way. If they're actually educated scientific youth, because they'll reject this either
Yeah.
way.
Which all gets back to the problem is because they have an admiration for science, they have to try and pick it into our beliefs. So theistic evolution starts with God. And this is where this is different to the Darwinian model. It starts with God, not something coming out of nothing. So they're not stuck with the nothing problem. They're not stuck with the blind chance problem. They accept that the universe is very old. They accept gradually increasing complexity and evolving happening. And it doesn't rely upon pure chance. So we're dealing with a model of evolution which is far more subtle than the Darwinian one. And we need to be aware of that. You know, that the Darwinian model, you can make fools of that very easily. This one is a more specious one because it puts God in the picture, and when God's in the picture, anything is possible. So, you know, they can explain all the gaps which Darwin can't explain. They can explain by saying, well, God kicked it along when he wanted to. God introduced it. God made it happen. So this is a much more subtle form of evolution we're dealing with. And you've got to keep remembering, the Bible does not support any of these positions. You've seen that before, but there's just their basic premise that the interpretation of Genesis is the problem, not science. And we have to change that. The Bible is very clear. God's anger is revealed from heaven against impiety, that is godlessness, the iniquity of men whose iniquity suppress the truth. And we are faced with people who are determined to suppress the truth. They should learn from the creation what a wonderful, intelligent designer God is, but men, and particularly evolutionists, are without excuse because the evidence is right in front of their eyes that God is remarkable. The problem with Romans 1 says that they worship the creature. You know, the evolution says the creature actually improved itself, the nature improved itself, not because it knew it was doing it, it just happened to do that. And, you know, the way you look at the world is totally different. Evolution looks at the world and says, look at those remarkable things out there, what an incredible chance that happened. The creationist says, look at the incredible world out there, what a wonderful God made it. And that's just the difference of approach that we have. And we need to see the difference between evolution and creation. We'll go past that. Abraham Lincoln said this: I can see how it might be possible for a man to look down on the earth and be an atheist. So look down and look at the troubled world and say, boy, I'm an atheist. I cannot conceive how we could look up to the heavens and say there is no God. And that's quite a brilliant statement by Abraham Lincoln. So Darwin's concept of origin to man, you've all seen that timetable. I'll just leave you a little cartoon to end off with. With.